Hi again. I'm back and I want to talk in this second vlog again about the crossover by Kwame Alexander, and also I'm bringing in this time the Using Young Adult Literature in the English Classroom by Bushman and Haas, and I'm in chapter 1 in their section called Developmental Tasks Confronting Adolescence. And tying that in with the crossover, obviously, you know, I've already spoken about the theme of identity and in relationship to young adult literature, and how it's a common thread throughout this type of literature. And so what I want to do is just go ahead and read this quote from them that explains what it is. And it says, "The major task of adolescence is the formulation or reformulation of personal identity. Middle and high school students are primarily engaged in the task of answering the question, who am I?" And it would definitely appear that for some young adults, it's easier to find out who they are than it is for other young adults. We see that Josh has basically been deconstructed or deconstructing his identity from his childhood and losing a lot of those pieces of who he thought he was or who he was supposed to be. Whereas, interestingly enough, we don't see that with his brother Jordan. He doesn't seem to be struggling with his identity. He seems to be very solid in who he is and moving forward in all the things that young people do. I'm sure he is formulating his identity, but perhaps he's just adding on to what he already has, which is in contrast to Josh, who is basically losing almost all of his childhood identity in order to have to formulate a new one. And so Josh is in this crisis. So I want to look at that, because for our purposes, in the Bushman and Haas text, they talk about several tasks that young people go through to formulate this identity, but we'll just look at two for the sake of time, and that is achieving mature relations with age mates and the task of gaining independence from parents and adults. So with Josh and his achievement of relations with age mates, we see that his brother is obviously his closest age mate, and that's Jordan. And Jordan, again, seems to be learning or achieving this formulation of identity, figuring out how to relate to other people his age in his relationship with Miss Sweet Tea. And he's, seems to be doing pretty well with that. Josh feels very alone and abandoned by his brother, and he loses a piece of his identity as a twin when Jordan begins to enter into his own formulation of identity. And then he ends up lashing out at Jordan in a very violent way by hitting him in the face with a basketball, to the point where Jordan has to go to the hospital, and it's a very bad situation. And it seems that Jordan seems to understand in a more grown-up way, in a more adult way, that Josh was lashing out at him in extreme anger, and that it's not healthy to have a relationship with someone like that. And so Jordan begins to reject Josh even more and won't study with him or any of the things that he was doing, that they were doing together before. Now there's none of that, because Jordan has drawn a huge boundary with Josh. And so Josh is left with this estrangement between him and his brother, and he writes this poem, Estranged, on page 187, and it says, estranged, the interruption of a bond when one person becomes a stranger to someone who was close, a relative, friend, or loved one. So Josh is learning the very adult lesson that you can't always expect even the people who love you to endure abuse at your hands. And that's an adult lesson. Kids hit each other all the time, and then they go back to playing and they forget about it. But when you have to learn to relate to people on a more adult level, violence is no longer an option. It's not something that you can solve problems with. And so Josh is having to formulate his identity in a way that he didn't think he had to before, maybe. And now he's realizing, I can't have a relationship with my brother if I'm going to hit him. And so he has to rethink, part of that identity in himself. Now, as far as the task of gaining independence from parents, Bushman and Haas write this: the goal is an adult relationship with parents rather than the dependence of childhood. And so Josh is in a place now where he can no longer depend on his dad or his family to give him his identity anymore. And I really love the part in the book on page 166 where this all just comes out and becomes clear, because Josh tells his dad, "I prefer to be called Josh, Dad, not Filthy." And then again he says on the same page later on, "I'm serious, Dad, don't call me that anymore." And so here we see this new identity that Josh is formulating in his relationship with his parents, and his attempt to work out his new identity and find out who he is and what is meaningful to him in life. And he doesn't think that it's Filthy McNasty. That was a myth to him. That is not somebody that he even wants to be. And so in closing, I really thought it would be a perfect ending to leave you with basketball rule number 8 on page 191. And it's the last basketball rule in the book. And it says this: "Sometimes you have to lean back a little and fade away to get the best shot." And so that's just an indication that Josh seems to have found peace with letting go of his old identity from his childhood, letting go of the things that people expected of him, and beginning to embrace who he really wants to be, and learning how to walk that out in a way that's constructive to his relationships and constructive to his parents. So I just want to leave you with that. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to any comments or responses.